Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining. I imagine we'll have a handful of people join as we get going, but want to be cognizant of everyone's time. Again, my name is John LeBaron, and I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at Pattern. If you are unfamiliar with Pattern, we are a marketplace accelerator, e-commerce accelerator globally. We have 18 global offices and work with brands to accelerate their growth and control across different marketplaces, .com, subscription, all the sorts of areas that are booming right now. So really excited to have some folks join us today on measuring the impact of financial control. I'm joined by our Chief Financial Officer, Jason Beasley, as well as our Head of Revenue Operations, Scott Crandall. As a quick reminder, this session is being recorded, and we will be able to send out the recording to attendees and registrants after this. If you have questions during the webinar, feel free to put them in the chat box or the Q&A, and I will try to monitor them as time goes by. But without further ado, I just want to introduce these two fine gentlemen. They're a lot smarter than I am, and as it comes to measuring the actual impact of control, a lot of people obviously like the idea of more control on marketplaces. They see their content getting out of control. They see their pricing getting out of control. They see their distribution getting out of control. But as we chat with a number of different brands on how do I regain this control, it's tricky. And there are some sacrifices and there are some pros and cons for sure. And what it often comes down to, we get this question a lot, is how do I package this? I'd like to get control. How do I package up to the board or to our, sales organization or our legal department? How do I create urgency? And so we're going to be walking through some specific ways in how to actually measure and quantify that control. So without further ado, Jason, Scott, you guys want to introduce yourself? Maybe Jason, you can go first real quick, give a little background and how much quantifying you've been doing in your career and what brings you here.
Sure. Thanks, John. So happy to be talking to you all. I bring to the table about 20 years of finance experience, mostly with GE and Comcast, in a variety of different locations around the world. I think the last time I counted it up, it was 36 different locations in 14 different industries with those companies. So seen a lot of stuff. I'm super excited to talk about this topic because in my entire career, price control is something that's been super critical.
Awesome. How about you, Scott?
Yeah, so I don't have nearly the pedigree of a Jason or the global experience here, but I have a background in consulting, management consulting from Bain & Company. I worked in private equity for a little while, and then recently came from a marketplace in the home services marketplace called Thumbtack, but have kind of supported revenue operations, sales, and worn a number of different hats in that career. So yeah, I've spent my face in spreadsheets for most of my life.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between you guys as we go along here. But just to set the stage, wanted to pull up this slide here. And when we talk about specifically marketplace control and quantifying the impact of really regaining or maintaining control, this is what we're talking about. So marketplace control, when a brand's image or really their brand overall is being represented with integrity and its products are being sold through authorized sellers at the authorized price. Well, that's what we're talking about. So price control, it's the intersection of price control, brand control, and distribution control. So we're going to be touching on a handful of those things. The other thing that I wanted to kind of walk through, and we kind of have price erosion up front that's in yellow just because we're going to be talking about it first, but really everything, and we have this kind of diagram of this iceberg here because as you think about the impact of control across these vectors that we'll be talking about, and we'll be starting with things that are easier to measure and then going on to things that are honestly a little bit harder to measure, but giving you guys some frameworks to think through it. And honestly, the end of the day, it's going to be, if you want us to help you evaluate, if you feel like you're going to be going into this pitch into the boardroom or with your executive team or sales team or whatever, and you need some help kind of building the case, we'd love to help you out. So with either data or some models or whatever it looks like. But as you're kind of thinking through this, I think the canary in the coal mine on a lot of this really is, what is the impact of brick and mortar? And that's something that's taken honestly a little bit of a backseat during COVID. But, you know, as vaccines roll out, as communities start to open up a little bit more, you know, retailers will, at least in the United States, will continue to become a massive part of the retail economy. And in any situation where you're given this task of quantifying the impact of control on marketplaces, the impact to brick and mortar is probably the most important, but also the most overlooked um, piece of that equation. So we're going to be going through these aspects that are a lot closer to the marketplace side, but I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes before we do going through this brick and mortar piece, because it's so important but so easy to kind of forget. And so I think one of the things that is super important to understand as you think about an effective control strategy on marketplace is this notion of distribution. In a traditional retail environment, so many brands are incentivized and have been forever, and it's good to have scaled distribution. It's always this old adage of like, get your product into as many doors as possible. There's a club channel, there's a convenience channel, there's a specialty retail channel. E-commerce obviously is another channel to retail, but you know, is always in brick and mortar, like get into as many doors as possible. And because of geographic separation or some other discrete mechanism, it was hard for customers, unless they were crazy coupon clippers, to compare pricing across these channels. And so it worked. Because there is so much transparency in the world today across retail environments, your success is really predicated on the degree to which you have very limited distribution and what we call selective distribution on your online channels. Obviously, your D2C, you're going to have your own, no one else is going to be distributing through there. You're going to own that channel. As you get into e-tail channels, as you get into marketplaces, you get into other channels in e-commerce, you want a very limited distribution. And we have examples from our existing, you know, some of our brands that we represent, but also, you know, Anchor, they're like the poster child of very selective distribution. If you want to buy Anchor products, you buy them from Anchor on Amazon. There are not a lot of other third-party sellers. They don't sell it to 1P. And so it's just this kind of paradigm that I think is super critical. Just to reinforce this, I think, you know, what happens if you do not have selective or, you know, really tight distribution on your online channels, you end up oftentimes with price erosion because, you know, like I said before, you have all this distribution in your brick and mortar, you have price transparency on e-commerce, then you enter in this price kind of matching game where your brick and mortar is trying to match the price of what's happening online. And honestly, the cost of transacting online can often be cheaper. And so that's what leads to, well, I'll just pull this lever to be able to win the buy box or to get the sale. I'll just lower the price. I've got a little bit of margin. And you end up with this death spiral. And if you've been on a webinar before with us, that, you know, we'll go through this death spiral. So I'm not going to belabor the point, but at a high level, this is what happens. E-commerce starts booming. You know, a ton of sellers go to marketplaces to hawk your wares. They get access to your products because they're a brick and mortar, you know, retailer, or they go to closeouts, or there's some diverted inventory. You know, this competition among those sellers where everyone gets to see the price. You know, you start to lose the buy box. Your brick and mortar starts to match the prices. Your retail profits erode. You're starting to get hit with, you know, price match guarantees from those brick and mortar retailers, or they want steeper accruals, or they want, you know, price match guarantees, or whatever it looks like. And then ultimately your e-commerce profits erode because you're getting crapped out on Amazon, for example, or there's this race to wholesale and all of your channels are less profitable. So, you know, there's a whole ebook we've written on this thing. So again, I'm not going to go too far down the path, but really wanted to call out the impact to brick and mortar. And so in some cases, getting control on e-commerce, even if it's like a net, not loss, not gain, from a kind of pricing and margin perspective, it is generally protecting or, you know, helping to reinvent and improve and turn around a profitability death spiral that's happening in brick and mortar, which ultimately might be, you know, 80, 70% of your sales, maybe even higher than that, depending on how big you are. So just really wanted to kind of call that out. and walk through, kind of this notion of, how do you think through staving off price erosion, not just in your e-channels, but all your channels. And so maybe I'll get to you on this, Jason. Like, again, some people on the webinar may have heard this before or seen this kind of e-commerce equation, but maybe you can walk people through that and then talk about, on the price side specifically, when price erosion starts to happen, what ensues.
Yeah, I'll just want to build on a couple of the points you made. First, the paradigm of, in the traditional space, you want as much distribution as possible, but in the e-commerce space, you want this limited distribution. The way I think about that, is the issue in e-commerce isn't getting to the end consumer. The marketplaces handle that wonderfully. So you are, by being in e-commerce, you are getting to maximum consumer reach. The issue is more how you are doing that. And that's why limiting the distribution really allows you to even further maximize that reach. Because when you don't have conflicting sellers driving price down and maybe using different strategies to reach those consumers, you have one seller that is coordinated with your other channels. This equation can really actually get maximized, right? Because they are the ones driving the traffic. They're the ones driving the conversion. So we have lots of tools that we do this in Pattern. There's other tools outside of Pattern where people do this. But really, the equation is not that different from a traditional equation. Revenue equals quantity times price. We've just broken it down to really, to get that quantity sold, you really need two key components. You need traffic, you need people seeing all the listings in the right way at the right time, and just really driving that up. And we've got lots of tools for that, whether it's SEO optimization, things like that. And then you need conversion. You need people that see it, they love it, they're excited about it. The buy box on whether it's Amazon or another marketplace is super clear, exactly how they want to see it. They click, they buy, done. And that's really how we break down that quantity part of price times quantity equals revenue into those two key pieces. But it all connects back to, you can't maximize these two key pieces unless you have that limited distribution that John talked about.
Yeah, thanks a ton. So on the price, obviously, as the price starts to erode, that's going to affect the overall revenue that you're getting. And I think we have an example here of a brand that really started, on Amazon, at least, kind of in the mid 30s. There's like a compression sleeve that they offered up, got hit with, a lot of third-party sellers, and you can kind of see the erosion over time. And I would say this is an extreme example, but it's not dissimilar from what we see, every single week as brands come in here and they're a little bit up in arms of saying, how do I turn this ship around a little bit? How do you think about quantifying the impact of price erosion, or how do we at Pattern think about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's the analytical way that you can do it, which is, you actually see the price fall. The problem is, once you're in that death spiral, it's hard to turn it back around, and you have to make certain changes to really recover from that. I think the other thing to do is to really start to get the gauges from your brick and mortar retail. Every one of us has been a consumer that will walk, and we have brands tell us this all the time. A consumer will come in, they're interested in a high price item. They probably spend 10, maybe 15 minutes with a sales rep in store, getting all the information they need. And then they just pick up their smartphone, just look for it on a marketplace, see a lower price and say, yep, thank you very much. I'll walk out and go buy it. Or even worse, they go, or maybe this isn't worse, but it eventually will be worse. They go to customer service and they show, whether it's Best Buy or, Walmart or whoever, the big box retailer, here's the price on Amazon. The big box retailer says, well, I'm going to match that. And then that filters back through, eventually to all of your big, huge arrangements with brick and mortar. So there is an analytical way to do it, but I would argue that you're probably almost too late if you're looking at a chart like this and you need to recover dramatically. Better to get those early indicators of what are my protections and what is my brick and mortar feedback telling me about my channel clash. And then also getting visibility to what's actually out there. And I think Scott's going to walk through a tool that we have that really shows you what that marketplace looks like also helps a ton.
Cool. So maybe I'll just, add on to this. I mean, one of the things we'll do for brands, and there are a lot of tools out there like this, and but we have a proprietary tool in here that really helps brands understand the impact of certain sellers. And we've kind of, obfuscated some of the data here, but just look at, there's generally a pretty long tail, but there's also a lot of concentration of sellers that are creating disruption from a price perspective. And again, I talk to a lot of brands that will say, well, yeah, I eliminated 20 sellers. And I'm like, well, which 20 sellers? Because as you can tell here, it starts to drop off. If you got rid of, if these were part of your 20 sellers, amazing. If the 20 sellers you got rid of only had, only comprised 1 or 2% of the buy box, then probably not as exciting. So I think this is an easy way, and we kind of keep this front and center with our brands, is understanding how much are you losing. Now, there's certainly a price elasticity of demand component of this that we also help model out for the brands that we represent, help them understand what's going to happen by restoring price integrity. Will demand fall off? To what degree? How fast will it recover? So there are a number of different models that will help on that front as well. But I think the point is certainly well taken. So I think the next thing after you just kind of fix the price erosion, or at least quantify, hey, we're losing $100,000 a month. And then, as I mentioned before, it's not just on the marketplace that price erosion is affecting. We had a large retail kind of consumer electronics brand that we represented, or that came to us, and they were paying Best Buy $500,000 a month in price match guarantees, just because they had 400 unauthorized sellers selling all of their products on Amazon, and they were just hemorrhaging profitability, and they didn't know how to fix it either. They didn't know who these unauthorized sellers were, where they got their product, why they were dropping the price. It was just a complete mess, and we got that brand back under control. But it's not just, again, how much are you losing on the marketplace, which was the previous screen. It's how much is that lack of control on price hurting the brick and mortars, quantifying that. Scott, you spend a fair amount of time with the brands we work with, understanding the tax on growth because of a lack of control. And maybe, I kind of have this little flywheel here. Maybe you can walk people through how we think about this, and we'll keep going through this and talk about some of how to quantify the impact of stagnated growth.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think you guys have hit on some of these points. If you kind of start in the middle of that selective distribution and head to the right on control, but that price stability online really drives that leverage with your retailers. John's example of this consumer electronics company, we had a similar one. We were talking to a company in the optics space, so binoculars, gun scopes, that type of thing, last week, and they gave that exact example. They said, we have this premium product, our binoculars are $450, and Bass Pro Shops will have their salesperson kind of spend a ton of time with the customer, educating them about everything, and then to Jason's point, they go and find it 35% cheaper online, right? And so not only does that price match guarantee really start to hurt and really become kind of real dollars for that, for both kind of the brand as well as Bass Pro Shops, but you just lose credibility. You lose any leverage that you have with those retailers. They don't want to have to deal with all of that. And so, they're going to give shelf space to other people at some point who have kind of that better price stability online. I think as you kind of move over to the left of this growth side of things, once you've kind of nailed that price stability online and you're seeing that better brick and mortar performance, as you have that selective distribution on Amazon, on these marketplaces, there's a really great flywheel that starts to develop there, a really virtuous cycle. Because one thing that happens is, when we were looking at this optics industry last week, there was one of the major players there had 1,000 different 3P sellers that had owned the buy box over some period of 2020. And there's so many ways that that's just really bad for the brand. And I'll give you a few examples. So one, any of those sellers can go in and change the listing. They can change bullet points, change descriptions, change photos, any of that type of stuff. So if you're really trying to optimize your listings for SEO, and then you've got just like tons of sellers coming in and messing with that whole strategy, one, your data is going to be terrible. Two, you're not going to achieve the growth that you're really looking for. Another element of this is when you're dependent on this huge swath of 3P sellers, they're not necessarily going to be super invested in carrying your full assortment, right? And so we were looking at some companies in the shoe industry, road running industry, a couple of weeks ago, and all of them had like 30+% out of stock because they were just depending on this huge 200, 300 3P sellers who are just kind of throwing up whatever they have left in their warehouse on Amazon. And so it's just creating a really bad experience for anyone that wants to go and buy an Asics running shoe, a Brooks running shoe or something like that. And it's just always out of stock. So without having that like key partner, you really kind of mess with, not only sales velocity, but how your brand is kind of perceived on Amazon or on these marketplaces. And then the last one would be just kind of this ad performance and ad consistency. You can only kind of be placing ads when you own the buy box. And so if you're constantly having this like fragmentation and this kind of rotating buy box issue, then your ads are going to be all over the place. Again, you won't be able to have a really smooth strategy here where you can kind of, from a data-driven perspective, say, hey, this is what's working, and then here's the next step that we're going to take from an ad perspective. And the other thing I'd add there is that, if these 3P sellers are not maintaining MAP, they're kind of eroding their own margins at some point. So the more that happens, the less they then have to continue to invest in that ad strategy that'll drive you more and more traffic over time. And so, it starts with that price stability, both for kind of on the marketplace as well as how it impacts the brick and mortar. But, having that selective distribution adds so many kind of levers, I guess, to the growth that you could have on a marketplace.
Awesome. No, super thorough, and I appreciate that, Scott. And maybe I'll just mention too, obviously Pattern, we're a third-party seller, we sell in the marketplace, but this strategy is not exclusive or some exception to your overall strategy. If you are 1P, you should be implementing a similar strategy. 1P, Amazon can be your authorized seller. Now, I don't think personally, I've yet to experience Amazon being super motivated to improve your ad efficiency, and they're not making a ton of concentrated investments in your customer service or in your SEO. But the point still stands that a very clean buy box, whether it's Amazon owning that buy box or whether it's you as your own third-party seller or you're using an acceleration partner like Pattern, you just want that clarity and consistency so that you just are eliminating the noise and accelerating that flywheel, whether it's with the in-stock, whether it's with the SEO and the advertising. It's just all good things start to happen when you kind of clean up the mess. And when you don't clean up the mess, or when you kind of have a laissez-faire approach, or you kind of back off, there are these taxes that start to happen within your flywheel, and it starts to slow down. You kind of lose that lubrication. And so I want to have Scott, you speak to some of those as well. Before I do, I'll just remind folks, if you do have questions throughout that you want to put into the Q&A window or the chat box, feel free to put them in there. Again, the session is being recorded for those that joined after I made that announcement earlier, but feel free to put those in there if you have any, and I'll try to ask the panelists here as we go along. But why don't you talk about some of these decelerators, Scott, that can happen? You mentioned a handful of them, but just we've listed them out here as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I've talked about some of these with like limited buy box control, the poor SEO and ad management out of stock here. But one thing we find is, again, if you're just very dependent on these 3P sellers, I think we have a few examples here later in the deck, but if you're dependent on these 3P sellers to kind of set up your listings properly, really showcase your brand with great imagery, great A+ content, the right kind of bullet points and descriptions that will help to educate the customer, it's all across the board here, right? There's some that do a great job. But again, if they're owning less and less of the buy box, they have less and less incentive to actually invest in every one of those listings, right? And so, we frequently see this, that there'll be one or two pictures up for some brands on a lot of their like most important listings. no A+ content. No one's actually kind of responding to reviews or answering questions from customers on there. So, you're depending on a really wide swath of people to hopefully represent your brand really well. And the less invested they are, the less high quality that will be. So yeah, I think we've kind of hit on most of these. Unauthorized sellers are coming in at lower prices. And the more they drive that down, the more nobody can really achieve any profit on those listings. So
yeah, and I think this is where it's a little dangerous because there are so many great tailwinds in e-commerce that almost any e-commerce org is going to feel like it's very easy to pat yourself on the back in e-commerce because there's just so many good things happening, especially in a COVID world. It's like this bright spot, on the balance sheet, so to speak, that or the income statement that is really has these nice tailwinds happening. But again, we had a vitamin supplement brand in here. I don't know, it's probably been 6 months or more now at this point. But they said, "Wow, we don't want to disrupt anything," and we've been growing 25% over the last 2 years. And our CEO said, "That's slower than any other brand we represent in your category." And they were feeling excited about it. And it wasn't sent in a mean or vicious way. It was just saying, "Listen, like, I know you think you're growing fast, but you are actually losing share because you're growing slower than everyone else in your category that really has a focus on this." And so I think this is where those e-commerce decelerators can really start to add up, and sometimes in the shadows where you don't perceive it. And so in terms of quantifying the impact of this slowdown, again, it's tricky, but you really want to start to look to how is my growth comparing year over year? How is my growth comparing in my category against some of my key competitors? How is my growth? Is growth actually net new growth happening on e-commerce, or is it really just stealing share from brick and mortar, et cetera? So getting really clear on that to be able to quantify the impact of this kind of slowdown. One of those areas that we do that in is in advertising. It's obviously an awesome mechanism to pull, but if you're like many of the brands, especially during COVID, you've seen an increase in CPC. You've seen an increase to reach some of these competitors, especially on non-branded keywords. And so, maybe Scott, you can walk us through a little bit of how we help understand, the growth opportunities, or the inverse of that really is the growth tax through an unoptimized ad strategy, be it competing against other folks for sponsored product listings, for example, on Amazon, when you have a chock full buy box listing of 20, 30 different sellers, or just, not really optimizing and kind of being asleep at the wheel, not taking control of your ad strategy through, algorithmic bidding or automated ad campaigns, et cetera, and kind of doing everything manually. What are brands leaving on the table, and how do we think about measuring that?
Yeah, for sure. I think what we see the most often with brands as we talk to them is what you said of, this very fragmented buy box where you have, 20, 30 different sellers that all might have either a different ad strategy or no ad strategy whatsoever. And so that's just going to cause a deceleration in your sales velocity on an ASIN by ASIN level or SKU by SKU level. And so that's probably what we see the most often. And to your point, even when they do spend money, they may not be doing it in the most kind of intelligent or algorithmic way that they can. And so, they may be spending money on the most expensive keyword out there, which is going to, at some point, kind of limit their ability to continue to invest and to continue to spend here. And so, kind of what this chart kind of outlines is a little bit how we approach this sometimes, which is like, on an ASIN by ASIN level, our ad strategy is generally one to say, what are all the keywords that we could be bidding on for, I used a shoe example before, so let's stick with shoes, but like for this running shoe, what are all the different keywords? How important are each of those in terms of the volume that they're getting? But also, what's the cost associated with those? And maybe we don't want to go in and just start spending on the most expensive keyword from a get-go, because that's not going to get us the best return. And so what we generally try to do is say, hey, let's take some of the less expensive ones, but start to generate some SEO relevance on those, right? So if we can take some of these middle terms that aren't quite as expensive and really start to win on a ton of those with our ad strategy, and get a really solid return on them, then at the same time, Amazon, these marketplaces are going to start to recognize like, hey, this Brooks running shoe or whatever it is relevant for these terms. And we're going to start to get kind of that organic rank taking over to where we don't have to spend on those. And again, as that organic revenue starts to go up because we're ranking higher, then we can start to spend a little bit on some of those other keywords that might be a little bit more expensive. And so that's kind of what this graph illustrates is, you may need to spend a little bit, but once you start to get that organic relevance, then you don't have to continue to spend at the same rate as you did in the past. But in general, I think what we see most frequently is just the disjointed seller approach or the fragmented seller approach leads to no real kind of paid ad strategy, and just kind of a, and so I think one thing that leads to is not a coordinated ad strategy, but also a shorter ad strategy because they're not doing it well.
Yeah. I think those are all super effective points. And I would just kind of reiterate one of the points you made, which is, at Pattern, our philosophy is you don't invest in advertising to get clicks. You invest in advertising to build organic rank on keywords that are relevant to your product, build that organic rank, and get free money over time, so that your ad spend starts to either get reallocated to other areas and this flywheel kind of continues, or it just goes down as a percentage over time. And I would put us against our advertising efficiency against any other third-party seller in the market. And in terms of that efficiency, almost all brands that come work with us end up spending less and sometimes dramatically less on advertising because of this very proven strategy and the technology suite that we've built proprietarily in-house to support it. So I think it's super on point. The other thing that I'll just mention, and we have a question here that I want to try to get to, is just in terms of quantifying this, it really is as simple as looking at, your competitive set, what keywords are they ranking on, reverse engineering, which is not tricky, how much traffic that organic rank is bringing them, and then looking at you. I was talking to a respectable firewall company the other day, and I mean, they were like on page 5 on so many keywords that they really should have been winning if they weren't asleep at the wheel. And that's very easy to quantify. Like, this is how much money you're leaving on the table by being asleep at the wheel and not taking control really of your destiny on this incredible marketplace and platform. So one of the questions that came in, Scott, that I want to have you just think through or be able to comment on before we move on to the next tranche. We're about a little bit more than halfway through the webinar here. It says, how or what considerations should be taken for the COVID bump in year-over-year growth for sales planning? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess initial thought would be, to look at this category by category and very specifically. I think, everything that we've read and heard is that, this COVID caused a 5 to 10 year acceleration in terms of like the e-commerce transition, right? Obviously, some of those, some categories that we work with or talk to in like the health and supplement space, I think, everyone has become way more conscious about, everything there. And so a lot of people are trying whatever supplements are out there, frankly. And so I think categorically, we're seeing some of those things just have that COVID bump, and, you can't expect that same level of growth. But in general, I think this has really shifted a lot of consumer behavior. And so I think we'll continue to see, additional acceleration here. Will it be as much as we saw from like 2019 to 2020? Probably not. But I think, we'll probably continue to see, forecasts that we've looked at and what we're continuing to see with our brands are 20-30+% growth rates. And that differs a little bit by category, but,
Yeah, maybe can I add to that, John? Maybe just to go with that.
Absolutely.
I think the way I think about the COVID bump in the world of e-commerce is it's definitely not a bump as in it's going to come back down. It's really more of an early adopter to mainstream, mainstream adopter conversion. So it is a pull forward, of people that wouldn't really go into e-commerce for 2 to 3 years from now, but it's not like they're going to go back out. Okay, and what's going to happen is they've now adopted. So the growth rate, to Scott's point, may be a little bit smaller year over year, but we don't really think at all that there will be a true bump, if you will, in terms of it going back down. And none of the data that we have in our brands is suggesting that that's happening at all. The latest kind of phenomenon actually is we're seeing a more direct impact on when these stimulus checks are going out, how that's actually driving now direct e-commerce spending effects, which wasn't as clear in the past. So that's just what happens when more mainstream population gets into the e-commerce space, is you get a more direct impact. So my general feel is it won't be a bump. Of course, growth rates won't continue at the same rate year over year over year, but I highly doubt that there'll ever be a decrease in e-commerce in terms of a true bump.
Fascinating. Another question came in that I think is relevant specifically to this slide. It just said, does your process help narrow the keywords that need to be focused on most? And the answer is absolutely yes. We basically assign a winnability score. We have something called product destiny that literally at a child ASIN level, we assign product destiny in terms of a predictive algorithm saying, this is the organic rank that we believe based on the relevance, based on the price, based on the competitive set, that you should be able to achieve given all the right factors coming together on the conversion front, on the SEO front, et cetera. And then we work, again, dynamically and algorithmically to attain that rank. And so it's not just what are the words that have the highest winnability, it's what is the winnability versus the ROI or the cost of the CPC to generate that and the keyword volumes. And then you arbitrage the intersection of all that data to come up with a very specific roadmap to capturing those growth opportunities. So there's a lot of data science in there and nerdiness, but overall, the short answer is absolutely narrowing in on those keywords and knocking them off one by one and increasing the rank, really rank by rank is absolutely what has to be done to capture that. So let's keep moving along. A lot of good discussion here. Again, if you have other questions you want to ask the panelists, feel free to throw them in the Q&A window or in the chat, and I'll keep monitoring them as we go along. The next piece that we look at in terms of quantifying the impact of the financial impact, at the very least, of marketplace control is what's happening on brand erosion. And again, brand erosion is somewhat ubiquitous in terms of not just the erosion happening on marketplaces, but also within brick and mortar and your other channels, including your D2C, by the way. So, brand erosion, I'm not going to get to, MBA 101 here, but I think at a high level, you're wanting to think about your brand equity. And your brand equity really is just the customer's willingness to pay minus the cost of you delivering those products and services into the market. And so right here, we kind of have this brand equity and your COGS kind of sitting there. And this is really what Economics 101 is about. And why would someone pay over a monopoly? Why would you pay more than just the market price for rice? And when you go to Uncle Ben's, why would you pay anything more? Well, that brand equity is why you would pay more. That's that promise to the customer. And what is happening in so many examples is this race to wholesale, and it's just dismantling this brand equity. And so you see this erosion kind of coming off in a number of different factors that we talked that are generally all tied back into control. How fast are you responding to customer questions? And not just, again, at the listing level, but even as a seller. Who is the seller? The seller is getting questions oftentimes. Is that seller answering the phone, picking up the phone? Are they responding to the customer questions quickly? What is the delivery cost and timelines? Is it being shipped via FBA? Is it being shipped via FBM? What are happening from a return perspective and an order fulfillment? We talked about in-stock rates before. We talked about poor reviews and product photography. All of these things are happening to brands that are, like I said before, somewhat asleep at the wheel or just are not in control or taking this channel seriously and giving it the attention that it deserves. And if brand equity is falling here, it's certainly falling in other channels as well. I remember talking to a technology executive at one of the leading kind of home improvement brick and mortar stores in the US. All of you would know who it is. And they offer free Wi-Fi in their stores. And part of the reason for that is to understand where are people, what sites are people going to when they use the Wi-Fi in the store? And more than half of the times it was to actually compare prices and or to look at reviews. And so, if you're going to look for whatever, a hacksaw or a weed whacker or, even lumber, or like whatever, probably not lumber, I guess, but like, garden hose or something like that, and or a new screwdriver, or whatever it is, a lot of times you're going to go look and see what are the reviews on this, because they're not there on the shelf. And you can easily go to Amazon and say, what do people think about this? I'm not familiar with this brand, or I haven't ever used this before. Let's go check. And those reviews are massive. If you have a 3-star review on a drill bit or something on Amazon, they're just going to move on and move to the next thing. And so this brand erosion, by not taking this channel seriously and not maintaining control in terms of your product photography, your reviews, everything that's happening, really takes a toll. And again, as we said before, it's harder to measure as you go to the right of this iceberg illustration. So it's, what is the impact? Is it, $1? Is it $1 million? It gets hard, but you absolutely want to be thinking about how to quantify that impact. And we've got some models up our sleeve that we do as well. But these are the things that we do for the brands that we represent, is really make sure their product photography is on point, that we're calling out key benefits and features right within the image stack. If you've been on a webinar before on our content, you've probably seen these examples of, this was Pandora Jewelry before we took them over. This was what they were doing on Amazon. And amazing, like great products, good, star rating basically, and a lot of answered questions and customer reviews, but terrible product photography, terrible, brand representation on the listing. And we're going in, we're hiring product photography, doing casting sessions in LA. We're scouring all the reviews for questions about how many charms fit on this bracelet, and how do you use the clasping mechanism, and is this really sterling silver, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would just say, taking the representation of this brand up several notches, so that not only you're improving the brand experience for people shopping on the marketplace, but even those doing research in other channels. So really, really, really critical. Maybe you can speak to this one too. I think it's relevant to some of the other questions that have come through on the Q&A. But first of all, just saying, how do you kind of measure maybe on the opportunity cost front, and maybe, I know we're going to get to this in just a second on the opportunity front. So maybe it's a little premature, but how do you start to measure the opportunity cost, or what's at stake? And maybe I'll come to you, Scott, on this front. And what are we looking at here, and how do we think about measuring this opportunity cost?
Yeah, so this is kind of a beta version of our technology called Share. But essentially what we're looking at here is like and I don't know who the brand is per se, but like who is this target brand competing with on Amazon or on these marketplaces, and what is their market share, right? I think, a lot of companies have an idea of what this is offline, but I think they're really surprised to see what this is online, and especially kind of on Amazon, right? And if you look at that on that left-hand side, again, no idea who this brand is, but like Diba Oolong, like, who is that? That's probably not someone that this brand is thinking about, like, hey, I compete with these guys head to head. But we see this in a lot of industries where, again, I gave the example of like the optics industry, where there's all these foreign brands that are coming in, and they have a really good Amazon strategy. They have a selective distribution, and they're really kind of taking a lot of share and, bidding on keywords, on branded keywords of, the traditional kind of big brands here. And so a lot of times when we share this with brands, it's really surprising for them to see, like, wow, this is what the market actually looks like. And I'm not, nearly the chunk of that market that I thought I would be, or that I, perceive myself to be from an offline perspective. So, but this also helps to identify, for us as we talk through this with brands of like, hey, where is the opportunity for you, right? You're in this category right now that's like ridiculously fragmented, and no one's really winning in here. And so, kind of, how do we help you to kind of be that market leader there, where maybe some of your traditional competitors also haven't figured it out. And so, a lot of times there's that really great opportunity to be the first mover in your industry to say, hey, we're going to take Amazon and these marketplaces head on, and we want to have kind of the best practice there. And I think, like, from an opportunity cost perspective, that's where it is important to really be that first mover, because John gave that point earlier about gaining that SEO relevance and that organic relevance. One of the examples you gave, John, was Anchor. On some Anchor products, they have like 50 or 70,000 reviews. Like, who is going to beat that, right? Like, you've established kind of this like beachhead where you're just like, no one coming in is going to say, hey, yeah, I'm starting with 50 reviews, but I'm going to overtake the guy with 70,000, right? And so there's really a huge level of importance to figuring this out and figuring it out quickly, or you're going to fall victim to some of these foreign competitors or some other people that you compete with generally that start to just establish that relevance that's going to be really hard to overcome.
Yeah, so many good points there, and I'll even add, even the private label stuff, right? So I know so many brands we talked to are so frustrated with the Amazon Essentials and all of their private label brands, but those, I mean, you can even see this here, right? Amazon Essentials taking a huge chunk of share, and I obfuscated the brand name here, so that's why you don't see it here. But yeah, I mean, just they're coming in, they're winning on organic, their own platform, organic traffic for those keywords. And part of it is they're just doing a really, smash up job on it. So I think I meant to put that slide after this, just revisiting this notion of the opportunity cost. But so jump the gun there. But maybe, Jason, you could just comment a little bit around, how do you think about opportunity costs, and how should brands think about, potentially measuring or quantifying the impact of that opportunity cost?
Yeah, and I think, this will be helpful for, any of you that are thinking about talking to your C-suite executives about this. Sometimes it's really hard you have many things to focus on in a business, whether it's a CFO or somebody else, that you tend to not focus on what's hard to measure. But once something's put in front of you that shows you, hey, here are the gaps, and here are the different areas where things can be moved, and this is the potential opportunity of that, it really takes it to a whole totally different level of the discussion. So really what we're trying to measure, and this is one framework that we have here, is where are the gaps and what could the opportunity be? So I think if you just go quickly to the next slide, because I know we're running out of time, John. The team can put together, and we put together all the time, what we call marketplace performance scorecard. And this gives you a sense of all those things that we talked about: traffic, conversion, price, control, listing quality, review quality, all those things on one scorecard of how does your brand stack up versus the competition? And that then leads to a really easy discussion on what is the potential opportunity out there as you address each of these key levers. I don't know if you guys want to drill down more into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of this. At a high level, it just is really highlighting what are those opportunities. I read a funny meme the other day, because there's so much going on, especially with the stock market and the volatility and everything. It's like, if you would have invested in this, but you would be blah, blah, blah millionaire. And so the meme said, if you would have invested in JP Morgan Chase in 1863, you'd be dead. I said, I'm so sick of people telling me what I could have invested in that I didn't, and now I'm an idiot for doing it. So it kind of made me chuckle. But the point is not that. It's not to say, hey, you're doing it wrong. Hey, you weren't the first mover in the beachfront, property, and now there's no opportunity. There is always opportunity, and we look at this as really acceleration gaps for brands. What opportunities do they have to accelerate their growth on these channels? And where do we start, and how do we prioritize that to achieve maximum impact? So you can see, across some of those competitors that you have in your set, maybe you're doing really, really well. Maybe we don't start with content. Maybe we start over here at listings and bullet points. Maybe we start with channel conflict, and those areas to really shore up where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. I had another comment come through that I think is relevant to some of this, because it can feel, almost all the brands we talk to are under-resourced at some level. They're under-resourced. Maybe they're doing well on Amazon, but they're under-resourced on Walmart or eBay or Rakuten or Alibaba, or maybe they're really good at their SEO, but they need help on the advertising or the product listings or whatever. The goal of Pattern is to fill in those acceleration gaps for the brands, either from a data perspective, technology perspective, or a services perspective, and accelerate those brands to achieve their maximum really potential at minimum investment. So the short answer is, or the question that came on is, does Pattern help with professional photography or copywriting for the listing, or what's the best way to lay things out? Can you help us get more reviews? The short answer is yes, we do all of that. And honestly, our model is that we buy your product and then sell it. And so we do all those services, those acceleration services at no cost to the brands. So anyway, another question that came in was, what's a good NPS score? Is it relevant relative to your competitors? The short answer is no. Your NPS score is just relative to best practices across all of these things. Having us looked at thousands of different brands across this, we have a very good sense of where they rank. But I think it's really important we've started to build these scores out, not in isolation, to help brands understand where are they strong, where are they weak. Because perennially what we do see is, especially in certain categories, certain brands are just, or certain categories are just more susceptible to price erosion issues. Some certain categories are very, just have a lot of unauthorized seller activity for some reason. Others are honestly just a lot more clean. Some brands or categories have really high, great creative, and others don't. And so again, we've started to include certain competitors in those NPS scores. And maybe just going back again to this opportunity cost. I know we only have a few minutes and want to wrap up. If you do have other questions, folks, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'll try to get them in the last couple of minutes here. But Scott, do you want to just speak a little bit to, I think we've hit this a couple of times, but just this notion of benchmarking and understanding where you stand in terms of understanding the opportunity cost and measuring it?
Yeah, for sure. I think like all of this, everything, whether it's the NPS score, your growth rate, all needs to be considered in context, right? And so is it versus your competitors or versus your category, right? And so, I think sometimes we talk to brands and they're like, oh yeah, our e-commerce is growing at like 20%. And it's just like, well, hey, that's awesome. But also like your category is growing at 35%. So you're actually losing market share there, right? And maybe that scorecard helps to identify, why you're losing market share. What element of that, the traffic, the conversion, the price, is really kind of impacting you. But that context is critical to actually understand how you're competing in the marketplace.
Love it. Okay, so we talked about decelerators a little earlier. I don't know if you want to speak about the inverse. I think this is a great way to think through, quantifying the impact of opportunity cost. It's really just the delta between these, really, as I see it.
Yeah, and I think one thing I'd add on this one too is that, like, if you think about what Amazon or any of these marketplaces are trying to do, is they're trying to optimize for conversion. They're trying to optimize for the customer experience. And so, we talked about like out of stock or buy box suppression or some of those types of things. The more, it's kind of like there's the virtuous cycle on the high side here and the whatever the opposite of the virtuous cycle is on the downside here. But like, if you are consistently out of stock, if you are consistently suppressed, Amazon will, deprioritize those listings because you're not providing them the customer experience. They want a purchase to happen to fulfill the need of that customer, and they want it to happen as smoothly as possible so that customer keeps coming back. And so, the more that you can be in stock, have that great conversion rate, et cetera, the more that like Amazon will continue to view your listings as relevant and continue to kind of push you up the rankings. On the flip side, the more you're out of stock, the more you're suppressed, it's gonna be a hole to kind of try to dig out of.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when it comes again to quantifying this, do you want to just speak a little bit to the work that your team does with the brands that we engage to help them understand and kind of build that roadmap for growth?
Yeah, so this is just kind of like an example of this that we look at. We really try to focus on those three elements of the scorecard, right? The traffic, the conversions, and the price. And then kind of say like, hey, if we're able to kind of partner together and fix some of these things that we see that are wrong, or just kind of optimize things that you're doing okay, but we think we could do better with some, technology investments and whatnot, then what can that start to mean over time? And if you look at this kind of like base case, this blue here, I don't know what the exact numbers are here, but like you could look at that and say like, hey, yeah, we're growing 20% year over year. That's awesome. But again, like what's that opportunity cost? What could we be accelerating here, helping to gain more market share, helping you to grow faster than your competition by fixing some of those things, kind of being a partner to solve that, not just from the technology side, but hey, to John's point, we're going to buy product from you. And so let's forecast together to make sure we have that full set of inventory. And then, we haven't talked about it here, but also from like the price compliance standpoint, we partner with the law firm to make sure that like all your sellers are, the MAP is being complied with to eliminate buy box suppression, and also to, to make sure that the price on Amazon is the right price, is the MAP price. So all these things just kind of start to build over time. And, as we partner with brands, we focus on, hey, what's going to have the biggest impact the soonest? Some of this stuff, you can't do anything until you actually solve the MAP compliance piece. And so let's focus there and then kind of move to kind of the next biggest lever for impact.
Awesome. Well, I love this. I think it provides a very concrete and robust framework from which we can work with the brands. And I would just say, again, if you want a specific version of your scorecard, or you want to see what it looks like, or even you want a deeper analysis to understand what your growth prospects are, feel free to reach out. We love this. We love this. I mean, this is our job. This is our jam. We love doing it for brands. We love helping them see and clarify what are the opportunities that we see in front of them. We love accelerating brands. We have done it a lot of times, and we just love that partnership feel. We love looking people in the eyes and holding hands together and just like, just making it work. And we've grown brands tremendously and accelerated them, not just on Amazon, across a variety of different marketplaces. And so I would just invite, any of you guys that are here today. We've spent a lot of time and money investing in our infrastructure, in our talents to accelerate brands here. And I think we got, kind of the marks to prove it. So I'd encourage you guys to reach out. I really appreciate everyone joining today. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Jason, for joining us as well. We'll get this recording out to you. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions we weren't able to answer. My email is john@pattern.com, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks so much.